So literally almost exactly 2 years ago, just a few days apart from 2 years ago, I put out this video called He Screwed With My Head. And this was my 30-minute analysis of what went wrong with this guy I had been talking to for a few months, almost every day, who I went to visit in Atlanta, Georgia. He wanted me to go visit him. And it was like one of the worst weekends of my life. And this video was me trying to figure out like what happened, trying to get some resolution out of it. And 2 years later, I have all these thoughts about it, because hindsight is 2020. So I thought it would be interesting to watch this back. Recently, a few people commented on it, so it sort of like reminded me that this happened. And I think I was talking to a friend about this recently, but it's been on my mind, this whole story that I'm gonna watch back now. So I thought, if I'm gonna watch it back, I might as well watch it live and give my commentary on it, give my 2 cents. It's one of those videos that people had a lot of feedback, and it's actually one of my favorite things I think I've talked about on this channel, because it was one of those, we all have those moments where you just need validation, like you just want to know that you're not crazy. And in the comments, people were very supportive in saying like, no, you're onto something. Like you spent time with what looks like, a sociopath slash narcissist slash like all those, toxic, abusive person, all those phrases that are kind of buzzwords that unfortunately I feel like nowadays we always throw out and label everybody, but like this was like textbook definition. So I'm gonna watch this back while sipping my iced coffee. Oh, so good, I can't wait. Shall we begin? So I have quite a story to share. So just to start off, I look like two totally different people, don't I? To me, that's like me at my most Mediterranean. And this is me like at my most Caucasian. I mean, I dyed my hair reddish. I'm obviously shaved. I also feel like I just look pastier than, I don't know, I looked like healthier in that video, but maybe it's lighting, who knows. That's also my old apartment, fun fact, which is literally just downstairs from this apartment. And I so much prefer this apartment. Like, I'm obsessed with my apartment. That apartment was not a fan, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I was not in the same tax bracket. Let's just leave it at that. For the past 2 months, I have been talking to a guy daily, and some days it was just text messages, but more so than not, it was phone calls, video calls, sometimes hours long, like 2 to 3 hours, hour-long conversations for 2 months straight. And this guy has been super, super proactive and expressed a lot of interest. And I'm not used to that. It's refreshing. And I thought, maybe this is how I guess it's supposed to be, that somebody shows up and shows you that they're really interested. Okay, so in retrospect, this was one of the first, not red flags for somebody to actually show interest, but this is, I think, how people get themselves into abusive situations, which is that in the beginning, it's perfect. Like, it's how you think it should be. And I think for somebody like me, it was easy for me to get myself into this kind of situation, because I wasn't used to somebody actually like courting me the way I felt that I deserved to be courted. So he was doing all the right things, and by the time everything else happened, which we'll hear in this video, it's like it didn't match the person I thought he was. So anyway, I don't know if that resonates with anybody watching this, but my point is, one of the things I learned from this whole thing was like, you're more susceptible to these abusive personalities when they show you a side that you've never seen, like a positive side that you've never had the chance to get. Like, they show you a healthiness in the beginning that you've never experienced, unfortunately. And that's what makes it harder to then let go of somebody like this, because you believe that's the real them. Fine with that. And then we've been talking, like I said, for 2 months. So then you build something emotionally, I think, especially when you hear their voice night after night. And he was all about me visiting him. So I finally visited him this past weekend. And I can truly say it was one of the worst weekends of my life. One of the biggest mind fucks I've ever had. And I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to process it. But basically, as soon as I arrived in his city to visit him, and I had to fly, right? I took a plane, so I had to pay for a plane ticket and everything. He already seemed to be in a crummy mood. Like, the car ride home already felt like a different person than the guy I'd been talking to. It felt like a cloud had just suddenly appeared over us. And I couldn't figure out why. And even from that first car ride that was like an hour long because there's a lot of traffic, the energy was off, and I already was like, is everything okay? Like, you're acting very distant, you're acting very aloof, is the word that I used. And he was like, no, I'm fine, I'm just really tired, and I've been sitting in traffic for so long to come get you. That was the first red flag, because in my mind I'm thinking, so, like, I just flew to come see you, I just, paid for a round trip ticket, that's not nothing, to deal with airports and stuff, to see somebody and to take, this chance that we both wanted to take. But I didn't say anything because when somebody's aggravated, right, there's no reason to pile up onto that. So I just kind of kept it inside, but I'm like, what a fucking narcissist in retrospect. Like, at the time I was not in a great financial place. I paid for this ticket to go see him, went through airport security, all that shit that, I don't know about you guys, I hate going through airports, all of that. The waiting in lines, the this, the that, the waiting, the plane ride itself taking time. And then one of the first things he says in the car is, I've been waiting in traffic. Like, so I've been waiting too, to come see you. I'm not complaining about it, I'm glad to be here. Anyway, there's that saying, if you want to know how it ends, I might be paraphrasing, if you want to look at how it ends, look at the beginning. Meaning, the journey, the progression is why you are where you are, or why something ends up the way that it does. So I'm thinking about this, watching this part of the video, in that, like, that was the first red flag. That first car ride set the tone for the whole weekend. And I remember that car ride being a mindfuck. But in retrospect, like, that was it. Like, that was the beginning. The seed had been planted. We met halfway. It's not like you picked me up from my home or from my city and I just had to sit there and wait. So that was the first red flag, and basically that's how the rest of the weekend was. He would get weirdly upset at really silly things that I felt were very small, insignificant things. Like, one meal was salad. He had made us salads, and when we were putting the dishes into the dishwasher, he was like, make sure you rinse that first before putting it in the dishwasher. And all that was, since it was salad, it wasn't anything like super greasy or gross. There weren't like patches of, leftovers. It was really just a little bit of dressing was still in my dish. And I said, really? Like, there's just dressing? In my mind, this was just an innocuous remark. And even something like that would just set him off, and he would make me feel like an idiot, like a total imbecile who was born yesterday. He was like, obviously this is what you do. You have to rinse it. Like, what are you talking about? That kind of reaction, and that happened throughout the weekend. But the thing is, I noticed it wasn't just with me. He was like this with total strangers. I totally forgot about that salad thing. And listening to myself talk about it again, I'm like, that is so ridiculous. Like, salad is literally the most organic. It's not even just about organic. Like, it's like, I understand the idea of wanting to make sure your dishes are suitable for a dishwasher. Like, you don't want to just have like chunks of chicken and something and throw it into the dishwasher. But really, salad? He was a psycho of this brand. So apparently there was a Spanx store, and I was like, that's interesting. Like, they have their own store. I thought this was just a product that they sell in different stores. I didn't realize they had their own store just for that specific item. And he looked at me again like I was an idiot. He was like, well, I guess they have a store. I mean, how do you think it became $1 billion business? And so it got to the point where I felt like everything I said, every innocuous remark, was a point of criticism from him. And basically halfway through the weekend, I already was like, this could never work. like, this guy has a chip on his shoulder, it's the wrong energy, life is too short. But in my mind, I was like, something's wrong here with this guy. I don't think I'm this difficult to get along with, or this stupid, or this annoying. There was no winning. There was no winning. Again, hallmark of an abusive dynamic where you're walking on eggshells with somebody, and no matter what you do, you lose. Like, you could say the sky is blue, you could say it's raining, you could say the sun is out, the sun isn't out. Anything you say, anything you do becomes a source of frustration. Like, in retrospect, like, that was so crazy that I felt like I had to watch. It's my first weekend hanging out with this guy, and I had to watch what I was saying. Like, that's already how you know, like, abort the mission. It's funny that I had to leave Atlanta. Like, I had to come home, and only a few days later could I figure that out. Like, in the moment, I cared more about keeping the peace than just getting out of there. Like, that's fascinating in itself. That instead of having the instinct of, like, this guy's toxic as fuck, just leave, for some reason I felt the need to stay there and keep the peace for the rest of the weekend, totally aware that I had no plans of seeing him ever again. But, like, where does that come from? Is that just, like, a politeness thing? You're like, oh, I have to see this through. I have to see how this evolves. Like, what is that? Is that a cultural thing that I was raised a certain way? Like, you know, almost like finishing your plate, right? This compulsive thing of, well, you don't want to waste food, right? So you don't want to waste this trip. You don't want to ponder the what if he is just having a bad day? I don't know what the reason was for me to stay even the whole weekend after clearly all these things were huge red flags. But that in itself is fascinating. It's funny how I remember in the moment just being like, every 5 minutes being like, what just happened? And just like the mind fuckery of it. But watching this now, I'm like, this guy was such a dick. Like, he was just such a jerk. And it's funny that in the moment when you have an emotional attachment building to somebody, you aren't able to see things as objectively as just like, oh, this guy's just mean. Like, he's just mean-spirited. He's just a jerk. This one restaurant that we were going to go to yesterday, but it was too crowded. And I said, you know, deal, sounds good. Let me just call them to make sure there isn't a crazy wait like yesterday. So I called them in the car. And, you know, I said, hi, I'm just wondering how long the wait is. They told me it was half an hour. I'm like, okay, thanks. And as soon as the phone call ends, he's like, what just happened to your voice? And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. And he's like, your voice just changed drastically. It got super high and soft. So immediately what that registers for me is, you just sounded really gay. What was up with that? This I remember. Now this was like the final, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. I remember that after this happened, I was like, I need to go home. This was what prompted me to be like, please drive me to the airport. Like, at that point I was like, okay, I'm cutting the trip shorter than it was supposed to be. Like, I'd rather wait and sit at the airport than spend any more time with him. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but this guy's one of the most, if not the most masculine gay guy I've ever met. And he had mentioned earlier that weekend how important masculinity was to him, which I remember in that moment when he had discussed this, I thought, is he trying to say that's where the aloofness is, that I'm not as masculine as he thought I would be? So immediately, a million thoughts are going through my head now that he's critiquing my voice. And he was making me feel crazy. You know, like I had pretended to be a different person for 10 seconds. I'm like, I don't think I sounded different, but maybe I did. Maybe, you know, because I was speaking to a stranger and asking a question, my voice went up, as people's voices sometimes, you know, change when they're asking a question. It's, instead of speaking like this, they're like speaking like this. I don't know, but he was making me question every single little thing. And now I'm getting like livid inside, because I'm like, what is wrong with you that I am in your space for the weekend? I am in your home, your turf. And you feel the need to make me feel inadequate or uncomfortable. And at that point I said, listen, I think we should just skip dinner. I think you should drive me to the airport. I think that might be best. That would have meant me waiting at the airport for, you know, waiting for multiple hours instead of just getting there and going through security and waiting maybe up to half an hour. But in my mind, I'm like, I just want this to end, maybe that'll make it better. And he said, okay. And as soon as he said that, my heart kind of sank, because then I felt like he felt how I was feeling, that he also just wanted the weekend to end. And so in a way, I guess that made me feel weird, that I felt like, up to that point, I felt that he lacked self-awareness and that he was just kind of a jerk. But I didn't realize he was also fed up, in a sense. And so we're driving, and it's very quiet and awkward, and I'm not talking and he's not talking, and suddenly we're at a restaurant. And I'm like, what are we doing? And he's like, we're gonna eat. And so now, again, it's this bittersweet feeling, because a part of me is like, I kind of just wanted to go to the airport, but another part of me is like, okay, he's trying to make an effort to resolve this before we both go home kind of bitter, feeling bitter. This makes me sad to watch back, that a part of me still was like seeking his validation, which I've realized is a thing for me. Like, I've even had coworkers that I hated, that like everybody hated at the company, but I had this weird twisted part of me that like I wanted to be able to dislike them without them ever being not liking me. Like, I still wanted to be well liked by people that I shouldn't care to be well liked by, because I don't like them. So in watching this, I'm realizing that this dynamic only even happens because people like this guy find somebody like me who's sensitive enough to seek their validation regardless of their fucking mind games. And at that point, we come back into the car, and he's kind of driving around aimlessly now at another mall, and I'm like, I think you should just drive me home to the airport. And he's like, really? You're just gonna have to wait at the airport. You don't want to just kill time, at least seeing something different or being more comfortable in a car. And I didn't want to hurt his feelings and like totally, make the vibe even worse. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I kind of just want to be at the airport by myself. So I said, I don't know. I don't know what to think. Yeah, maybe I think you should just drive me to the airport. And at that point, he goes, this just can't work. Like, and that's okay. We both feel that this can't work. It is what it is. We tried. And again, my heart kind of sank, because even though I knew that it would never work, and that I was in a sense also rejecting him because I just felt like he was a dick the whole weekend and really unpleasant, it's a whole other layer of disappointment when you feel that you're also being rejected. Because again, it made me feel like he's saying, you're not adequate enough for me either. And so we had, a bitter, kind of unpleasant ride to the airport, where we were trying to figure out like where this went wrong. I do remember that in the car, he was kind of like digging to see how I really felt. And that in retrospect, like I was just like word vomiting everything that I felt, but he had an inability to express what his thoughts were, which in the moment I remember thinking like, why isn't he just telling me, like, and me like dying of the curiosity. But in retrospect, I think he literally doesn't know how to feel or know how to express his thoughts. Again, it makes me think that people like this find easy targets. Like, they find people who are more empathetic. And I wonder if do they know that that's the word for it? Like, do they know that they're attracting somebody who's empathetic? Or do they just recognize the person as being different from them, and that's what, like opposites attracting thing? But I almost feel like sociopaths, and narcissists, that they can feel that you're sensitive, and they're attracted to that because it's like this thing that they don't have, they don't possess it, so then they are like yearning for it or something. Second that I stepped into his car, the energy was off. And I mentioned that to him, and he said, well, I went in for a kiss and you went in for a hug, and that was a horrible first impression for me. And I was like, I didn't even know that happened. I just went in for a hug organically, and I felt you kiss my cheek. I didn't know that there was a rule that I was supposed to go straight for a kiss when it's our first time meeting in person. Had no idea that the whole weekend he was harboring that. Had no idea that introduction in the car had not gone the way he wanted it to, or that I missed a kiss or whatever. Like, had no idea. So either I have zero self-awareness, or this guy was a fucking psycho. Leaning towards the second point. But I told him, I was like, if I could take it back, yeah, I would have kissed you back if I knew that this would upset you. So again, there's this thread of me defending myself, constantly feeling like I have to explain myself to someone who is actually seemingly hypersensitive, but very insensitive towards me. And then I got this flashback to a date that I've talked about on this channel, which is the date that I had in Tel Aviv, Israel, with a guy who I walked away thinking, this is the guy who turns into an abusive boyfriend. This is the profile of that. And now that I've had more time to process this past weekend, I'm realizing that the two of them have had a lot in common, actually. More and more in common. And I told as soon as I arrived at the airport, I called my best friend. And she was like, this guy's crazy. Like, you don't need to overthink this. This guy is the profile of an abusive person. Even before that word like slipped out my mouth, that was her take. And I said, I get what you're saying, but then I'm like, how has this guy been in a ton of long-term, like years-long relationships, and I've never been in one? Like, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm the issue. And my friend, because she's a good friend, was like, stop it. Don't even go there. Don't even think this way, because I know you know yourself. You're not a difficult person to get along with. You're pretty easygoing. So, hindsight is 20/20, and the more time passes, the more I realize more things that just kind of irked me, that were weird that he said or did. For example, he mentioned that every year on his ex's birthday, he says happy birthday to him. He sends him a text, and then when the ex responds, he makes sure not to respond to the ex, to kind of be like, yeah, well, fuck you. Like, we're no longer together, so you don't, this is what you get. You get a reminder of what you have with me being thoughtful, but I'm not giving you more attention than that. And I remember thinking, like, when he said that, it just kind of marked me like, damn, that's extremely petty. You learn a lot about people based on how they treat other people. That's a good lesson, too. Like, when you look at how somebody treats people in customer service roles, or how they treat their family members, their friends, their exes, you can learn a lot about somebody. And I do believe that the way they treat others is a reflection of how they'll treat you. And I told my best friend that, and she was like, that shows a lot about somebody's character. That on the person's birthday, the day that's supposed to be like their day of that year, he wants to make this person feel bad. On the day that's supposed to be their favorite day or their happiest day of that year, a celebratory day, he has no problem. In fact, he relishes in making that person feel bad. And I was like, wow, that's actually really well said and a good point. For me, the final thing that just kind of said a lot was that when I was in the car about to step out to leave, to fly back home, he tried to go in for a kiss. After all of this, after this weird, tense weekend, after the conversation in that car about how we're both on the same page that this just wouldn't work, and I even told him, I think being with you would kill my spirit. So yeah, we're on the same page. I just am sad that it evolved to this stage. I literally told him being with you would kill my spirit. That was one of the last things I said to him in the car. And looking back, I think it's really cool that I was able to be, like, despite being mindfucked the whole weekend, I kind of threw out some like gems to him in terms of like expressing exactly what I was thinking. And I'm sure he had to have had other experiences with guys like this that were mind fucks for those guys, but they couldn't fully express how they felt to him. A, because they maybe needed time to process it, just like it took me time to process it, but also because it's like so taboo to tell somebody like, this is how I feel. You are like a spirit crusher. After all of that, you try to go in for a kiss? To me, that's weird. I don't kiss people who the chemistry is ruined with. And it's funny because my two best friends that I told about this last night when I was on my way home, both of them were like, I bet you he's going to reach out, because that's what people like this do. they fuck with your feelings, but then they also feel guilty, and they still want your attention or your validation, even though then they'll still fuck with you. He will reach out to you. And they were both right. He texted this morning and he said, thanks for flying in. Hope you have a great week. Enjoy the beach in Miami. Which a part of me is like, it's nice that he's not sending a mean text, but another part of me is like, where was that kindness and that politeness while I was with you 24/7 for 2 days straight? Your kindness is now a little too late. I also wonder what would have happened if I responded to that text. I didn't respond for obvious reasons. I wonder if he would have tried to pull me back in somehow, or if that was just him trying to be like the good guy image. This is the same guy who had told me that he would bring cookies to new neighbors. Like, some of these people, you think you're always going to spot like a narcissist, a sociopath, or whatever. I feel like these people try to blend in and try to have this like nice guy persona. This is the kind of person I can't get closure from. I can't feel better about. This is somebody who I think has his own issues to process. And this is somebody who I don't think I think he wants somebody to be exactly how he wants them to be. In retrospect, I disagree with that. I think that this is somebody who will always find faults with anybody who he comes across, because they say that narcissists at the root are actually very, very insecure. So I think it's like a projection thing. Like, because there's things about him, anything that's not perfect about him, any imperfection, because he feels like it's a threat to his own identity, I think people like that end up projecting that on anybody. And this just reminded me that he had told me his type, like his dream guy was Marcus Checkenberg, the 90s supermodel. Like, there's a lot of people whose like perfect type is a supermodel, but in retrospect, like, your type, you're gonna say that your type is a guy whose career revolves around physical perfection. Like, he's not just like a random model. He was like the top model, the supermodel at a certain point. And a lot of it revolved around the fact that he was physically sort of a manifestation of like perfect fitness, like no body fat, super fit, lean, tall. I don't know, maybe that's judgmental of me to just be like, oh, his type was a supermodel. Well, clearly he was superficial. A lot of people's type is a celebrity, but I'm just thinking now, like, he had an obsession with perfection that, in retrospect, like, that's a very common thing with narcissists, right? It's this obsession with what they perceive to be perfection, and it typically is a very superficial perfection. Meaning, there's nothing I could have done differently. But it's still, I still feel weird. I still am having a weird day trying to process. I'm still trying to process this, and like I said, it hit my Achilles heel, because I'm like, was I just not attractive enough for you? Was I just, was I not masculine enough? Was I not smart enough? Of course, I know I'm opening up Pandora's box by making this video and by inviting feedback from you guys. But that's the deal with this channel, right? Like, I can't create online content and create content where I expect people to connect with me or to want to connect with my channel and what this is all about, and then keep a wall up. So that's my story. And I guess to conclude, I think everything is a learning experience, and what I learned here is, yeah, it's important to trust your instincts, but sometimes your instincts don't prepare you. My instincts did not prepare me for this situation. I didn't expect this result of a weekend. But it's a repetition of the lesson from that date in Israel. And that lesson is, you don't have to fix everything. By the way, thinking about that date, I'm now realizing the two of them had something in common, which is that they both played the victimhood card with their exes. Like, out the gate, within the early talks, it was like, oh, well, my ex really fucked with me. My ex really did a number on me. But then in like getting to know them more and more, I was like, you're not so much of an angel. But what I do know is I don't want to feel this way ever again. And I don't want to be that person who's like, oh, I'm cutting myself off. I don't want to date anymore, blah, blah, blah. But now I get it when people say that. When people kind of become reclusive, I used to think it was always that they're living in their fear. But now I understand that maybe it's just self-protection. You know, you don't like how this makes you feel. And I have learned that nothing is more important than your peace of mind. If that means maybe pumping the brakes and not exposing myself to guys for a while just to feel saner and not question every little thing that I'm doing or how I'm being perceived, maybe that's the healthier outcome, even if it means not taking chances and kind of like putting up a wall for a bit. I hate to say that, but it sounds like the healthier approach, at least for a while. Okay, so I have so many thoughts. First off, hindsight is definitely 2020. It's interesting how once you have distance from something, like temporary, what's the word I'm looking for? Temporal distance, is that a phrase? Once you have distance in terms of time, you have more of an ability to emotionally disconnect from something, right? So now watching this video, it's so much easier for me to think about it in purely logical black and white terms. But I remember being that boy. I remember coming home from that trip and being like, for a while, I was just like so drained emotionally. I remember my libido was affected for a few weeks. Like I just like didn't even want to think about men at all, sexually, romantically, nothing. That's also an interesting thing that I've noticed about myself, that when a guy really hurts my feelings, like a guy I'm into, or like I have a weird sexual experience or whatever, or talking to a guy on an app, my guard comes up for like a week or two. I just can't. And I wonder if that's like a biological thing, that you're wired to like go into no mating zone, to put it in scientific terms. I think you just have your guard up, like you don't want to interact with men in that kind of context again. But so I remember being really affected for a while, and you can tell at the end of that video, I was really thinking like, I don't want to date for a while. Like, I don't like how this made me feel. And I'm watching this video thinking like, that poor kid, even though that poor guy's me. But I'm like, wow, for somebody to get into your head that much, for somebody to be that toxic and that broken, that they affect your spirit, that says so much. And I only spent 48 hours with him. I mean, we had been talking almost every day for 2 months, right? So that's the only reason I could have tolerated that for 48 hours straight, is because I was trying to, the whole time, the whole weekend, the whole 48 hours, I was trying to go back to the whole 2 months previously, right? Which again, in these past 2 years is something that I've thought about, like, oh, this is how people get themselves into abusive situations, because they're always trying to get the person back to them at their best. But when you do that, you're ignoring the reality that at their worst, it's really bad. And that's something you hear a lot with people, like battered women say a lot too, from domestic violence, will say like, when it was good, it was amazing. When it was bad, it was really, really bad. I just look back at certain elements and I'm like, it totally explains it. Like his house was just like him physically. It was just like his physique, meaning it was like beautiful in a very superficial, sterile way. Like he was hairless, and I actually like a hairy guy, but he was hairless, perfect body, like abs, muscles. He was attractive in a very superficial way, but other than that, he didn't look that distinct or unique. His house was, everything had a place, everything was like designed a certain way, but it was very sterile. Like it had no personality. It actually looked a lot like how houses look, how homes or apartments even will often look in Miami. They're very like crisp and modern, but in a sterile, cold kind of way. Like tile floors, white walls, a lot of white everywhere. So it's like stylish, but in a sleek kind of, I don't know, like modern museum or like your plastic surgeon's office kind of way. Watching this video made me realize how much, despite it not feeling right, I kept trying to like fix the situation the whole weekend. And I talked about that in the video, how much I realized after the fact that I'm a fixer, that I try to fix things, and that not everything needs to be, you know, perfect bow, but that comes from a place clearly of seeking validation or insecurity. And the beautiful thing is, and I've shared this story in a separate video on this channel, but the beautiful thing is when you meet somebody who not only accepts you for who you are, but embraces, like, is really into who you are authentically. And so I made that video last summer about this Argentinian guy who I still talk to. You know, he's not in Miami anymore, but we still have our little connection here and there. But he loved that there's things about me that are more boyish rather than like manly or masculine. And that was his type. And so when you have somebody sort of validate your authentic self, there's something so heartwarming about that the person's basically telling you, don't change. I really like how you are the way you are. And when I look back at this guy, even if that weekend had gone well, that's somebody who clearly wants to find somebody vulnerable enough to not only mess with their head, but to try to change them into somebody they're not, or who can quickly sort of project his shame onto other people. And that's not somebody that anybody would want to end up with. Like, you don't want to be with somebody who makes you feel emotionally unsafe. And it's just so funny, again, or not funny, but interesting, that those 2 months leading up to that trip, I never felt that. But there's something different about being around somebody in person. When you spend time with somebody in person, especially for 48 hours straight, it's like you see them in full 3D, if that makes sense. And if you think about it, when you're talking to somebody on an app, when you're talking to somebody on the phone, when you're texting with somebody, all of that is like a one-dimensional view of somebody, which is why meeting somebody through an app can be so problematic, really, right? Because it's not just that people can manipulate the projection, the presentation of themselves, but it's also like you project something onto who you think they are based on the cues you feel from that one-dimensional image. And then in person, it's a whole other element because you pick up on like facial cues, right? Like reading mood, body language, chemistry, and those are things that you can't always pick up on from a phone call or a video call or Skype call, Zoom call, whatever. I'm curious what you guys think about this. I'm sure some of you were already subscribed 2 years ago when I put out that video, but I'm curious whether you were subscribed back then or not, or whether you've seen that video or not, what your thoughts are on this. I remember at the time feeling like kind of traumatized by this experience, but I'm so glad it happened, because these are the things that years later, you're like, now I know what to look for. It's kind of like a vaccine, you know? Like in the moment there's soreness, but now that your body recognizes that, it's forever protected against that thing in bigger quantities. So if I ever meet a guy like this again, it'll be much easier for me to pick up on those red flags and to notice a pattern in behavior that I'm like, this doesn't feel right, feels eerily reminiscent of that other guy, and so on. Thanks for watching, guys.